Also, ich habe den schwarzen Peter gezogen. Ich habe hier eine ganz riesengroße Gruppe, ist schon fast eine Schulklasse und, und Gastmoderatoren. Und die große Frage ist, wie macht man so etwas? Also, weil wir haben ja auch nicht 3 bis 4 Stunden Zeit, dass wir auf alle so ein bisschen einzeln eingehen können. Die andere Schwierigkeit ist, dass alle etwas sagen können, wird vielleicht auch schwierig. Also deshalb habe ich mal gedacht, wir machen es mal so. Wir haben ja jetzt einiges gehört. Also wir haben insgesamt 13, glaube ich, oder 14 Projekte vorgestellt bekommen, die zwar, vielleicht sage ich mal, unterschiedliche Haltungen haben. Aufs Erste fällt mir auf, dass Kosmos eigentlich fast so eine Antithese zu den Projekten, die wir vorher gesehen haben, gebracht hat, in dem Kosmos im Prinzip viel mehr in den Regulativen arbeitet. Also öffentlicher Raum wird eigentlich durch Umdeutungen, durch Shiften, durch Verändern der Regulative erzeugt und weniger im Prinzip durch Infrastrukturen in erster Linie. Also bei den anderen Projekten ist mir aufgefallen, dass sie tendenziell versuchen, quasi natürlich logischerweise ein bisschen eine Architektur zu machen, das sind die Architekten, und im öffentlichen Raum, und da ist natürlich immer die Frage, reicht das oder reicht das nicht, oder ist das ein bisschen zu plakativ zu meinen, dass man ein Objekt hinstellt oder einen Platz gestaltet und dann der Platz dann auch wirklich so öffentlich wird, wie er wird. Also wir könnten natürlich die Projekte auch so kritisieren, wie das üblicherweise im öffentlichen Raum ist. Da ist die Polizei, die sagt dann, aha, aber wie steht es mit der Sicherheit? Dann kommen die Leitungen unten, da kann kein Baum hin. Also im öffentlichen Raum zu arbeiten ist eine Tortur. Deshalb haben sich auch ganz viele Architekten aus dem öffentlichen Raum zurückgezogen und beschränken sich sehr stark auf die Gebäude, weil wirklich die Einschränkungen sehr groß sind. Nun, wie machen wir es jetzt? Also die Frage ist, ich sage das mal so einleitend, vielleicht auch als eine These, aber ich denke, wir beginnen mal mit den Moderatoren am besten und versuchen unsere Eindrücke oder unsere Thesen zum öffentlichen Raum vielleicht mal zu formulieren ein bisschen und dann Reflex zu nehmen oder zurückzugreifen auf die verschiedenen Projekte oder auf einzelne Projekte und da etwas dazu vielleicht auch Näheres zu erfahren. Wenn nicht alle drankommen, dann ist das nicht wegen der Qualität der Projekte, sondern hat es viel mehr mit dem Gang der Diskussion zu tun. Insofern also soll niemand beleidigt sein, wenn ein Projekt nicht zur Sprache kommt, dann hat das nicht mit der Güte zu tun, sondern weil uns vielleicht einfach aus der Diskussion etwas eingefallen ist. Gut, ich fange mal vielleicht an in unserer Runde der Moderatoren und stelle gleich mal die Frage, ich erinnere mich an eine Aussage von Ron Herron, von Archigram aus, ja, das muss so Anfang der 70er Jahre gewesen sein, wo Ron Herron sagt, also die Architekten haben es nie geschafft, öffentlichen Raum zu machen, weil sie im Prinzip keinen Begriff von Öffentlichkeit hätten. Ich frage jetzt gerade mal in die Runde, also wie sieht jetzt das 50 oder 60 Jahre später aus? Was meinst du dazu, Fabienne?
Okay, gut. Ja, guten Abend, danke für die Einladung. Ja, das ist wahrscheinlich immer noch richtig und wenn ich jetzt trotzdem nochmal auf die Projekte Bezug nehme, mir hat die letzte Präsentation am besten gefallen, auch weil ich denke, sie hat am ehesten den Brief eigentlich beantwortet, nämlich Räume wach zu küssen oder eben zu ermöglichen, während andere, da war ich ein bisschen erstaunt, also ich kenne Basel schon lange nicht mehr so richtig gut, aber ein bisschen kenne ich es noch, Räume versucht haben zu verbessern und verschönern, die eigentlich ganz okay schon so funktionieren. Also vielleicht ist es so ein bisschen eine Architektenkrankheit und tatsächlich glaube ich, dass es darum geht, mit Regeln zu arbeiten, das Regelwerk zu lockern. Das würde ich drängen, deswegen fand ich auch den letzten Projektvorschlag so gut, weil der erstens mit Regeln gearbeitet hat, darum geht es nämlich, und zweitens eben angefangen hat, diese Regeln aufzuweichen, anstatt Tools in den Raum zu stellen, weil ich glaube, genau so funktioniert in meiner Wahrnehmung eben öffentlicher Raum nicht. Und was mir gut gefallen hat, ist die Präsentation von Villach, ja genau, mit diesem ja, genau, das fand ich ziemlich cool, weil das mit diesen Rändern spielt, mit der Porosität der Ränder, mit diesem Öffnen und Schließen von Wänden, von toten Winkeln, so als Tool, das man überall einsetzen kann, fand ich cool. Ist so klein, aber vielseitig einsetzbar. Vielleicht beantwortet das indirekt deine Frage ein bisschen mit dem Umweg über die Projekte, aber ich meine jetzt, wir sollten über die Projekte reden, oder? Nicht über Archigram. Militar.
Yeah, thanks very much. So let me say I'm really happy to be again in Basel for the friends, and it's great to see you. So I lived here for 6 years, and I share a lot of sentiment about, I'm kind of Basel nostalgic, right? And I find these projects resonate very well. So they represent for me a kind of a celebration of Basel, right? There was a lot of fun, a lot of a kind of a good cheer, kind of a pleasure in the common, in the public, right? This is what these projects represent. And I thought about European city as a city, and I would say Basel is a kind of a prototype of such a, let's say, urban historical structure, which is profoundly public by nature, right? It almost constitutes the definition of what we consider as public. So the various histories of creating what we call a public space today are kind of encapsulated in the history of a city like Basel. So let's say a marketplace or a religious ritual or let's say space, for a direct democracy, carnival, even the actual urban structure, which is pedestrianized, is public in the nature, right? The kind of a mixed-use buildings, the access to the street, from the private interior and so forth. And having lived in Asia, in Singapore for several years, I'm kind of returning to these experiences and understanding, of course, this is not something that is to be taken for granted, right? And in that sense, I resonated very much, or the example from Chile resonated very much with those experiences that I had. So let's say a city which is based on the ideas of privacy and automobility and kind of mass infrastructures that transport people, the cities where the kind of corporate hand or a kind of autocratic state can, occupy space in a kind of unrestricted way. These are quite common, and I agree they have to do with the kind of neoliberal policies that are perhaps much more visible elsewhere in the world, right? So looking at these projects that celebrate in a way what is already there. A lot of projects are kind of interventions to enhance space which is already public. That's what I thought was kind of fascinating, right? The stairs or the bridge or the landing at the Münster or, the space is already public, but we can improve it. It's kind of like our common city as a kind of a common sculpture, something that where we contribute, to. And I thought, well, one word which I wrote down is urgency, right? I understand, absolutely understand, and this is the question I would like to address. I completely understand deeply, I understand Basel, and I consider it my city. And I completely understand this kind of a benevolent, open celebration of Basel in what it is, and I think it deserves to be celebrated in such a way. But I'm wondering what is the urgency of public, right? And I think that where should the public project be situated in the present day and age, and why, right? Because public, of course, is also synonym for resistance, no? For protest, for possibility of emancipation, for possibility of claiming equality and difference, and all those, and even such histories that are partly conflictual could be excavated even in Basel. I mean, 68 happened here as well, right? So I think it is interesting to think about Basel in such a way, right? I mean, of course, Switzerland is one country where we could just take this other route and say, okay, there are no problems, and let's just celebrate, right? But I think it's worth in our position, thinking as architects. I mean, where does the project have a kind of a context priority in the given time, in the given moment where we are today? So this is in a way the question I would address, to the participants.
So would you say the interventions do or do they not address the political dimension of public space?
I think some of them do, yes. Not all of them, yeah.
Can you point some?
It's very unfair. Well, for example, let me say, and I do it with Cosmos because they have 7 projects, so it's a little bit easier, because I love the projects, and I think it's very kind of a very brilliant curating of kind of, with projects that are so diverse, and they are not random at all. It's a kind of very brilliant curating of strategies that are, that we have as in a kind of a repertoire of dealing with the public, right? So, you can claim, let's say, redundant infrastructures as a public space, right? Underground river. You can change the rules of the use of space, extraterritoriality. You can change the regimes around the seasonality, around habits, etc., etc. So, fantastic thing about the waste disposal and so on. But the one, let's say, Marina Abramović, right? I thought, well, I mean, she can perform wherever she bloody wants in Basel, right? I mean, it's not necessary to create space for Marina Abramović, right? So I would wonder, where is the necessity? Where is the urgency, right? So that would be, and I...
Okay, thank you very much. That's, I think it's very important to think about the urgency of public space. And that public space has a very important political dimension. And it would be nice, oder wechsle ich auf Deutsch? Ich weiß gar nicht. Es ist so ein bisschen Sprachwirrwarr. Ich mache mit Deutsch weiter. Öffentlicher Raum ist ja wirklich in erster Linie eben auch politischer Raum, also wo etwas artikuliert werden kann, wo es die Möglichkeit gibt. Und wir sind natürlich ein bisschen unfair, wenn wir jetzt die Projekte von Kosmos, die natürlich schon so eine tiefere Bearbeitungsstufe haben und auch mehr Zeit gehabt haben. Und wir wissen ja alle, wir haben verdammt viel zu tun und da muss man noch hier etwas machen, dass natürlich diese Tiefe kaum möglich ist. Also deshalb vielleicht ein erster Punkt, der Marktplatz. Weil gerade wenn wir da einhängen oder anschließen, Marketplace is also Rathausplatz, is also the political space, is the demonstration space. And I'm not sure if this project will create this possibility of of the public or of a political space, because police would like it. It would be beautiful for police because you can close beyond and you can stop everybody. So it's somehow difficult to act with an architecture on a place like this. On the other side, maybe I would like to ask for another public space, because Focatin del Rio, for example, I think they made it with a very interesting theoretically approach, creating of identity by creating space, and to you even spoke about formal and the informal use, giving the possibility. But now I go just in the traditional lecture of just this space. I don't know how well people who is here know it, but I think a lot of people are on the harbor and in the evening. And what I want to ask to you, we have one side, we have the Rhine, a big public space as the river. On the other side, you make on the Wiese, it's another river. You make just the opposite thing, that you don't put the river himself as public space. You realize a public space to verbinden, to connect the Klebeck quartier and the Kleinhüningen, which is a village, and the Klebeck is an industrial quartier. Is it need to make this connection for you, or would you prefer also to have in front of the Kaserne, where you are working on now, to have a big square you make over the Rhine, which will be the public space between Dreikönig and Kaserne? I think here I see a little bit a contradiction. Could you tell me about what were you thinking about this?
Maybe in the future we can cover the Rhine, but maybe we're not that far. 200 years, we'll see. But I think what has been said before is like we felt that there was like an urge to someone like we were thinking about where does Basel need to have a new public space? Where does Basel, where the city where can we come up with a new place, with a new space in the city, which is not an upgrade of what is something that is existing? Where is there an urgence somehow? And we felt that right next to our door, there was this urgence. There was, because somehow the discussion everybody knows that discussion now in Basel is very kind of focused on the development of the riverside, the development of one of the part of the old industry. And we said, okay, yes, but okay, it's very focused here, but here there is something happening. There's already actually a public space, which is the Wiese, which is very, very much somehow used by the people of the neighborhood. And there is this neighborhood that is developing, but the people are still living there, and somehow they don't have a space to meet. Of course, they can go to the Wiese and they can make a barbecue, they can, go jogging, walk the dog, but there's not a kind of a common space that is there where they kind of identify with and they can use. So already was just to somehow look at what is there and what we understood as a need, and to propose with a very simple gesture to connect two bridges and create a platform. And then leave it open what can happen. Now we proposed some activities, but it doesn't need to be that. It can just be a platform in the end. Yeah.
Thank you. And for us, what is important is you're asking, why not in front of Kaserne? Because Kaserne already has the Kaserneplatz, no? I think you were asking, the big question with public space today is what to do with it and where to put it. And if you put it in Kaserne, you are not doing anything with it. So we said, okay, what is the place that needs a meeting space? What is the place that needs something that can happen out of it? And we said, okay, it's the periphery, it's Kleinhüningen. And that's why we put it there and not in the Kaserne.
Yes, I understand. It's somehow you are right that maybe actually it's not used, but when I see actually in the whole Kaserne, the whole Klebeck-Kleinhüningen, when we see actually Klebeck Plus, we have the Rhine-front harbor areas. We have much more developing areas than Klebeck and Kleinhüningen are together. And in the same time, this question, I think it was also, there are some projects that made that. And I see beside, for example, the big hall, which has a strong identity, could also be activated as a public space. Much better or much easier, I say, because anyway, it's very difficult also politically to put this there. Of course, it was not your topic now to make something which is real or which is possible real. But that's a question that it's important for me there, why really it is this space, or would have been other spaces in Kleinhüningen which are maybe much more interesting and much more easier to activate.
Yeah, but they don't need to be thought about, because this will happen automatically. And that's quite interesting, because there is this huge roof, this concrete roof. Now that everybody knows that, it's fantastic, but it's already there. I mean, it will happen. You don't need to do something there, because it will just happen automatically, I think. And then I think we were thinking about fringes, because I think we also think that there is the potential of, we're talking all the time about Basel being kind of a closed pocket, but it's not true. I mean, we have France, we have Germany on the border, and of course in between, on the fringes, there is like a void still, and these places don't exist. And that's why we were talking about identity, because by creating a space that has an identity that people can relate to, the place starts to exist, and the space in between Basel and Germany and France start to exist in the subconscious of the inhabitants of the city. So by creating space, we fill up the void, and then we can go to next step, which is, of course, colonizing with our mind Germany and France as becoming part of the urban fabric of Basel. And then we can also start to think about the spaces there.
And why didn't you make it in France?
Because we're just first level, like first step, and then the second step, next time we do it in France.
Because that's a general problem, yeah. Because Basel is very, very on his center of thinking Basel. It's the strong city, which a big agglomeration around. The French people are thinking of themselves that they are second-class people here in the agglomeration.
Yes.
And it's always the big power of Basel, of the strong Basel, who has culture, money, and everything. And I know it's very difficult to make projects in France. I was also making in Huningue, or trying to make projects in Huningue. It's extremely difficult because you have cultural differences and everything. But somehow it would be very important also when we think about Basel, not only to think about the 50 kilometers square that is the political territory of Basel, that the territory is much bigger. We have 180,000 people living here, and an agglomeration, it depends how you count, which are 500,000 or more. May I give, just on this topic, Fabian maybe, or would you try to answer, or Andreas?
Ladies first.
Well, indeed, I think that
public space. You know?
Yeah, I mean, indeed, the scale and border would be wonderful topics that can be connected to the problem of public space. Also, the question of commuting, for example. Do you know by any chance how many people cross the border of Basel every day?
A lot.
Right.
80,000.
Yeah. So for instance, this is another. You know, in the kind of thinking of public space in terms of larger scales, it would be you know, it would be a really interesting topic to tackle. Well, I think if we talk about the scale and the public space, I mean, one issue which emerges is perhaps the understanding of public in terms of governance and in terms of property, right? So let's say we forget, or we take public as a kind of a aspirational horizon that we, you know, a space that we should create by common action, etc., etc. I mean, public is of course something that's also inscribed in the law, right? That if we take you know, cadastral plans in Switzerland, I mean, there are several categories of property that we could call public, right? So we have the federal, cantonal, communal. I mean, these are forms of property that are still public, and I think it's interesting to you know, to consider what can be done with these. You know, I think that such thinking, which is a little bit legal, administrative, perhaps a bit boring, you know, it has a lot of rules to it, but I think it ultimately it can produce some kind of a really interesting opportunities for action. Yeah.
I would like to take Fabienne's point up that maybe there is a division between how architects or how anybody can interfere in public space, either by making a hardware addition or by making a software kind of transformation. The hardware would be basically you build something, right? The software would be you change the ways in which spaces are used. So this is the question of the regulations that you were asking. Right. And of course, indeed, in that sense, the projects can be distinguished upon where is the priority taken on. So if I take Scheibler Villar's project, there the hardware is really like a micro-urban kind of intervention. In Manuel Herz's project, it's almost also just a change of use, and you just add a minimal infrastructural change like the buvettes, the stage, and so on. But otherwise, it's basically the encouragement, use the space, right? Cesar's intervention is pretty hardware heavy, of course. Rabaran Hürzel's is a little less hardware, but still. And I'm really wondering. I mean, I think all of these strategies are perfectly fine. Sometimes you really need more infrastructure because there is just not enough. So sometimes you're missing a bench. And I think in Swiss cities, this is a real problem. So for instance, you realize that public space strategically has been voided of seating opportunities in favor of not allowing homeless people to lie down and forcing the non-homeless people into consumerist environments if they want to have a seat. So you have to go in a cafe and buy some stuff that you actually don't need. You're just tired and want to sit. So in these cases, a bench or whatever kind of seating opportunity makes absolutely sense. The question I would love to discuss with you would be, what do we actually need in Basel, in this city? What are the specific problems of public spaces here? And what can we learn from the public spaces that actually work well, that have changed, and that have become public spaces that work well? So for me, for instance, obviously, we probably all agree the Rhine-Klein-Basel embankment situation is a stellar example of how public space can work. And if we are honest, then probably the software change there was more important than the hardware change. Of course, they added things, and those steps are important. The chains that help you to climb out, the ashtrays for the barbecue stuff, and all those things are important. But probably the most important thing was that on a political level, it was made a decision that it's okay to swim in the river. And also something which is absolutely incredible in Basel, that different to the discourse of liability in the US, where such thing would be unimaginable unless the whole population has signed a waiver that they claim their own responsibility if they're dying, here people are assumed to take control of their own life. And if you drown, it's, well, you should have taken that other swimsuit or not taken that other beer before you jumped from the Mittlere Brücke to prove that you're a man. So this, for me, would be something that we could discuss. How much do we need to add infrastructure to the public spaces in the city to make them better? Or how much do we maybe need to take away infrastructure, like a subtractive urbanism? Or how much do we really need to work on the code that controls and governs the use of public space? One example, if you want to play an instrument in Basel, in public space, you can do so for 15 minutes, and then you have to change the space. Well, the whole Latin American culture would implode if it had to be imported into Basel. So I would love to hear from you architects how you felt about this when you were thinking about what kind of inspiration or intervention you would do. Do you have the feeling that because you're architects, you have to build? Or can you also imagine, like, I mean, there's other architects like Lacaton Vassal who were asked to make a contribution to a square, Place Léon au Coq in Bordeaux, and they finally came to the conclusion actually the space doesn't need anything more. It actually needs maybe traffic rerouting, cleaning, and other stuff, but it's actually beautiful as it is. So is there a way for an architect to come back to Ron Heron's analysis that you quoted, Philip? Is there a way for an architect to make a contribution to public space by not building, but by basically changing the software? Or do you have the feeling then you're not fulfilling let's say, the profile of your profession? Shadi and Ursula, I would like to hear you talk about.
Well,
wait a minute. Okay.
A bit more
Conflict.
cable there. Yes. I don't. I think I can speak for us. I don't see it so much as a separation. I think, of course, as architects, we try to take in consideration the social aspects, the regulation aspects. We're aware of that. But of course, we do have the tendency to also see what can we contribute with architecture, but in the broadest way. We have also analyzed the Rhine. We came to a different conclusion than you just said. Actually, I would make here a statement that just goes in the other direction, because I've been here 10 years ago, and 15 years ago, and 20 years ago, and it was already fine to swim in the Rhine. Mm-hmm. But you couldn't stay at the Rhine. The Rhine was just a slope, and it literally didn't allow to interact the way we see it now. So, of course, you also need to loosen the regulations a bit, but actually they didn't really, because still at 10 o'clock you have to be quiet, which is still somehow a limitation for many cultural activities, for concerts that want to be taking place, etc., which I think personally is a pity. I also believe if you live in the center of a city, you have to accept that there is noise to a certain degree, like you have to accept this lively city central community, right? So in my opinion, of course it comes together, but what we try to do at Klaraplatz is not, of course we now showed it a bit as an iconic stair, you know, I mean it's also kind of, you want to, you want the element to be seen, but to us what we actually discussed, and I think that was also the interesting point about this project, we discussed a lot about Klein Basel, and especially the area of Klarastraße that leads to Messe, and we were wondering, why is it changing so slowly? Like you have this extremely interesting mix of people, you're in the city center, and still somehow it doesn't really develop. There is a lot of areas also in Klaraplatz where there is space. There's actually more space that you can, you know, that you need, but it's not really being used. People walk through, but you never ever want to stay anywhere almost on this Klarastraße except for a few interesting stores or little shops, right? So we were trying to say maybe it's about creating a space that people can, I say that they can consider as their own, that they can, you know, claim somehow. And we felt like this process of claiming has a lot to do with being able to gather. And I think that's something that's missing in Basel, like spaces that are
in a very simple way designed together. Like you have benches, but on a bench you have to sit next to each other. You cannot have a group. Like any Spanish travel group is probably unhappy in Basel because they cannot sit all the 20 together and discuss. So we have this very, Swiss formal way of thinking seating in public space as a row, and it's not how it works. So I think sitting, staying, relaxing, gathering, talking is a very important action. So maybe it's more about allowing these actions to take place. So that was a bit our approach to the whole topic. This was too long, maybe.
No, perfectly fine.
I would say something about the question that you said, Rhine, that we are allowed to bath in the Rhine. You are right, we are much more in Switzerland, we are much more cool about responsibility. We have much more own responsibility, for me much too less, but when I know Germany, Berlin, Grunewald, where you have everywhere, it's not allowed to go in the forest, only not to have the responsibility of the city. So first thing of public space is to take own responsibility. We made NT-Areal, it was a 10-year former goods station, and we had also these questions. And the Deutsche Bahn, they were no, until the moment I said, we take the whole responsibility when there is an accident, and then it works. But somebody has to do this. And that was a private space, that's why City not can. For the Rhine, I think the most important thing that the Rhine works, and now I come to the stairs on the Rhine, of course, it's an important tool. But why the Rhine works with bathing, it's this fucking Badesack. Because the Badesack is a tool which is very interesting, because when I want to go to the Rhine, I go down the Rhine because I can't stay at the same place. I have all my stuff there. And so when I have all my stuff there, I need to take my stuff with me. So the Badesack, I remember the Badesack opened the whole thing to bath in the Rhine. The other, which was much more difficult, was that everybody knows everybody in Basel. That also. It's a big village, and of course you have to go down the Rhine, and then you have to walk half naked up the Rhine over again to your place, and then you took here a little bit and there a little bit, and everybody is looking at you, and and that really opens the Rhine. And for me, it's a very good example. It's not finally that the importance of making something at the Rhine to open also the stairs on the Rhine. It came after, finally, the big rush bathing in the Rhine. So somehow I think it's always the question of the egg and the chicken, but somehow I think it's very important also on this question. The question of the stairs, I think it's very, very special. It's interesting, somehow it's a little bit strange, this object. For me, it's really difficult to have a real position on it. It somehow it works very well. It's somehow a monument of the public, but it could work. On the other side, Manuel Herz with the Drei-Rosen-Brücke, where I miss a little bit, because I think what you made very good is to say it's now a polemic to say do something on this Drei-Rosen-Brücke. The Drei-Rosen-Brücke was thought really as this. They have these banks on the thing, which are used in the evening. There is a lot of people, warm summer nights, you have a lot of people. But I remember, I don't know if it was Katharina Steib who wanted to have this. It was the electrical power on these banks, the possibility to plug in, and
really?
That's something. Yes, wow. And that's something which I remember on 10 years of NT-Areal project. That the importance of infrastructure is there, but the most importance of infrastructure is toilets. It's really basics. It's plug-ins for electricity. Every other things people can do themselves. And something what I missed a little bit, and that's. It might be a little bit less precise. you have a lot of sun, and something against the sun would be very important on this kind of open spaces, on the infrastructures, and that's somehow what I think sometimes that we see often this. I don't know. You are also often in public spaces, and you brought also in your presentation. You said it's just a metaphor, or it's just metaphoric for activating this space. What would you think? How you could activate now when you say you bring a picture? The picture has a certain political importance. It brings a discussion on the thing, but what would you do there as a next step to activate it? First is to bring a picture, to thematize, make it as a theme, to bring the topic, and how would you proceed now if you would make now your next steps on this project?
Maybe a few comments on not only on what you just said, but also what the others were saying. This relationship between kind of small intervention, a little bit bigger intervention, or no intervention. Maybe it sounds very conventional, but after all, I'm an architect, and I think this is what we are quite good at kind of manipulating space, making it accessible, but also making it beautiful, making it kind of that we enjoy to be there. And this, I think, is actually the problem with most of the public squares in Basel. It's not pleasant to stay there. And there I would also contradict Fabienne when she said in the beginning that most of the spaces actually work quite well in Basel. They don't, I think. And that's maybe also the importance of, when I take the brief seriously, let's propose something for Basel. Let's not, with all respect, let's not make it rule-based, but let's make it very specific to a very specific location and try to identify what is wrong with it and try to, whether successful or not, find a response to that. So I think the specificity of these interventions or these proposals is important, and not that they're rule-based. Just a small footnote to your Badesack. You could also turn it around and say, I think the steps are super important. Let's imagine a situation where we have all the steps, all the people, but no Badesack. This would force us to always come in contact with others. People who don't have a Badesack, they need to kind of lend their personal belongings to someone who's sitting there, who's maybe trustworthy, take a swim and come back. This would make much more social, much more... It exists, yes, I know people who do it. Maybe it would be much a funner city if it wouldn't have the Badesack. No, it would be much more communicative. So I would also contradict you there. And maybe we should try it out one summer. Let's forbid all the Badesack and see how many more relations emerge out of just that. And sorry? Soft, very soft, the Sack, yeah. And then finally to the bridge. I mentioned this. I think the intervention, the specific intervention, is actually not so important. It is important that something is produced there, is built there, or is initiated. Maybe infrastructure like power, toilets, certainly, but why not go exactly the other way? Why not build a building on the Drei-Rosen-Brücke? Why not do that? Why not take Cäsar's tower from the Marktplatz and put it on the Drei-Rosen-Brücke? Why not go hardcore and see what kind of new possibility this would open up? I'm indecisive there. I would have no problem doing that, proposing that, but I think let's not disconnect it. I think this is, after all, as architects, we also have to play with the pleasure, with the beauty, with the aesthetics of space, and not just control rules. I think it sounds so beautiful, it sounds so nice, it sounds almost too nice, and I'm a bit skeptical of that.
Yes, but Manuel, it sounds also a little bit romantic to basically say, let's just build in public space and make a powerful contribution. But these regulations and political kind of limitations play a role as well. I mean, after all, Katharina Steib and Steib with their project made that very contribution to say we want this to be a boulevard, which was a very bold proposal to say let's colonize this infrastructure as an urban kind of space. However, we know it hasn't been done.
Because it's not pleasant enough to sit there. I know what you mean when you say that it's full of people in the summer. It's not. Come on, there's far too few.
No, but
and it's not pleasant.
It's
not pleasant. It's windy. There's no trees. I absolutely agree with you. We need trees. It's not pleasant to be there. And this is our task also as architects to make it pleasant.
No, but I'm saying the Steib proposal hasn't been implemented fully. Clearly, those benches are a residue. So there's a resistance. So why is that? And how can we go beyond that?
Yes, I actually think one solution is to add things or subtract things. So I'm sorry, Fabian, you're on again. I totally disagree with you with the idea of a lot of these spaces actually do not need any interventions or do not need additions or subtractions because they have had these thoughts, or how can we improve, for instance, Drei Rosenbrücke, it was an initiative, it was an idea of public space, but now it needs more. And I'm just adding to what you were saying, that it is then our tasks as architects, and we should take it seriously, to either add shading, whether it's trees, whether it's seating areas, I think that is important to actually look at the potential of every space that already exists. I just wanted to add that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to ask Maya.
Yes, Maya.
Because you made the project, which is a tool.
I just have a question, because these public spaces or squares, which like some of you think they don't work, why do they don't work? Like the place, for example, Klaraplatz. From my opinion, it's a square which works totally good. It's just a different group of people who is using it. Do you think this group of people should go away, or?
No, exactly. Yeah, they should be there too. What she's referring to, maybe for the people who are not so familiar with Basel, in Klaraplatz there has been a challenge over the last years that some groups of alcoholics claim some of these benches that exist. And what happens is that because there is not so many seating possibilities, other people don't feel comfortable to then sit next to them. So the idea was, and I'm not saying we succeeded, but the idea was to actually offer more so different groups would feel comfortable, and it's not so just singular anymore. And I think the Rhine, coming back to that, is actually the best example for it, where of course we have a huge space, but if you go along the Rhine, you can see everyone there. I mean, from all ages, all background, all situations. So I think it was more an intention to achieve that. Whether we now achieve that with this proposal is another question, but this was actually what we were interested in. And we also, and I didn't say that before, we also thought and maybe this is with what you talked about, regulation too. I think in general, there's not so many spaces that you can be without having to consume. So this is also a very important topic. So can you be somewhere where it's attractive to stay and you don't have to consume? We have a lot of beautiful cafes, restaurants, bars, but what with all the people who don't want or who cannot afford that,
But that's somehow also a question of the strategy of management of a space. For example, best example is Mitte, as not consuming space, and it's not the question of the architecture, it's the question that somebody managed it. And one of the problems also is actually that the city, they give space, public space, to people who can use it. And I see it in all projects. We have the difficulty that it's the public space won't be a public space because everybody, you have what I said before, you have the Stadtgärtner Gärtnerei, you have the Tiefbauamt, you have these ones and these ones and these ones, then afterwards you have participation. If you look today a designed public space by the city, you can read in the space who won in the participation process before. So that's somehow a very, very difficult thing between also keep it public, and I think it's a question also very much of management of this space. But I want to go back to the question of what is more important. Do we have to put an architecture, or we have to change rule? Finally, both are important. But I would, anyway, because you, from Cosmos, you brought a lot of changes, of rules, of lectures, other lecture of spaces, which I think are very interesting, because you are not coming from Basel. You saw, I think, a lot of things which are quite important spaces in Basel. For example, the Tunnel, it was a very nice party place before. Also very dangerous, because I remember that parties were flow away, because when the water is high, it's very dangerous inside. And we could go down at the Parkplatz. There was an open, it was open and you could go down. Actually, they closed it, of course. But I think on your idea, that's just a compliment on your lecture of things in Basel. But for you, what are you also proposed infrastructures like the art ferry, Giacometti thing, which is also a tool, but you have taken it. And I'm interested, for you, what is your, what is the stronger part for your work when you make proposals like this? It's thinking on infrastructures, or it's thinking of possibilities of spaces, of opening them, of changing rules, or are you combining everything together?
I think that here, why even this whole discussion started, should we make a building or should we just reuse the space? I think for us, the key question about Basel was a bit like, there's a joke from this American comedian who says, like, nowadays everything is amazing, but no one is happy. So for us, Basel was a bit like this. Like, we looked at it maybe a bit from an Eastern European perspective, you know, like we come, everything is fucked up where we were born, and we come here, everything is amazing, and then you see that people are actually, in the end, they are not happy. It's beautiful, it's well designed, everything is amazing. And I think this whole kind of attitude, it drives this minimal approach. So I don't think we would use the same approach of like slightly shifting infrastructures or doing minimal kind of interventions or changing the rules somewhere in a place where it really lacks a good building. Let's say if I build like in some provincial Russian town, I would probably not come up with like a snobbish attitude of changing a couple of rules and saying that everything will flourish afterwards. So I think that was our reaction towards, let's say, the beauty of Basel, the perfect design of Basel. But then we saw that actually, like, we have this conversation now. Some people say it functions, some people say it doesn't function, but it obviously doesn't function as well as in some, let's say, undesigned places. So that was, I think, that's why many architects also here came up with this idea of not always building something super powerful, even, or super, let's say, I don't know, a built structure. Even Caesar's proposal, which is the biggest of all, it still is proposing, let's say, public space. It doesn't propose like a functioning building. So I think that's for me the answer to this question. So it's kind of trying to reflect this, let's say, the high level of perfection. Even like the comments in the newspapers, which we discussed with Andreas, was a bit like a superficial take on like, actually in Basel everything works well. Why they even bothered about, let's say, doing this? So if you take superficially, you kind of see that Basel works well. So I think this is why many projects like, I don't know, Manuel's, which takes an existing space which is wide and people gather there, and it a little bit adds to it, and all others, let's say, and most of ours, they kind of do with this. The other thing which I was thinking is that it would be really nice if actually, because we had this attitude, most of us, it would be really nice if this project could be let's say, really implemented. And then that would be really like the next step, that we don't just speculate, but if like, I don't know, one of them would be really made, and it doesn't take so much money, doesn't take so much, let's say, effort. It doesn't like, no one is proposing to build like a huge skyscraper with the underground parking, but so most of them are really feasible. So it would be really nice if this exhibition would lead to some, I don't know, public referendum, and one of us would finally build it, and we would all gather there on like one steps or one bridge or on a river or whatever, and discuss it again. That would be for me.
We're working on that.
Yeah, very cool.
Suzanne, you had something? No? Does it fit?
Yeah, I would like to comment on the Badesack topic again, because I read during this short research we did for our project, I read that the Badesack actually exists for very long. I'm sorry, I cannot tell the exact date, but I was really surprised it exists very long. So I think it's not just the object itself, but it's more also an attitude, a general attitude that is like a discovery of the Rhine or of swimming, and then maybe a better design or a good sales strategy that this Badesack became so popular. So in a way, whether it's by inventing a nice design for a Badesack or by a nice stair, whoever could contribute. And of course, as an architect, you're kind of asked to be multitasking, also becoming political, trying to change rules. But in a way, I agree with Manuel saying that in a way, there's one main topic maybe that we're in a way best in, so it's kind of obvious we also try to contribute on that field, which doesn't mean we should not engage in other topics.
But is it enough for architects to just say, well, we are good at designing and we make proposals and then we propose them and then we get frustrated when they're not taken up? Isn't the question of public space so important as a political discourse? We need to find some ways of channeling all these great ideas that are here into a political discourse. I have a feeling there's one architect in the Große Rat of Basel. That is not enough. And also this architect is in the SVP. And I mean, you know, maybe he's a really great architect, but the question is really what kind of articulation do we find for this kind of contribution that is made here, which I really find utterly relevant. And it's not a kind of ivory tower discourse that we have here. Really, this affects the livelihoods of all of us, of the entire population. These are all projects that really make a difference. And I'm just wondering, how can we get outside this building with this discussion and to maybe into the parliament? And what do architects need to do there? Can they just stay in the office, or do we sometimes also have to take the phone and call a politician and say, actually, I have a great idea. You have money and I have an idea how to spend it well. Manuel.
But don't you give your own answer? I mean, you as an institution have this impact also, have this power, you have this influence. When we look at Basel, we see maybe quite unique constellation of very high quality architecture, very high quality kind of projects. We can hate them or love them, something like Novartis, something like Roche, something like Vitra, something like the Rhine, which depends on many people, but it also depends on a few select actors. The head of Novartis had this idea and he pushed it through. Jacques Herzog and Pierre de Meuron are probably kind of two, I don't know, machine guns pushing through some of these ideas. They have the charisma and the authority and the connections to do it. You as a museum, not quite yet, but maybe soon. It's our responsibility, it's also your responsibility to do it. I don't think that the solution is that we should try to get the seats in the parliament. I think it's much cleverer if we stay outside of the parliament and influence the politicians with being seductive, with being intelligent, with kind of good drawings or good proposals.
Why do you think so? Why do lawyers and bankers and
because
other kinds of
they are
professions
bored.
think it's useful?
They're in a stupid profession and they're bored. I think our profession is so much more interesting, so much more fascinating, that we have the tools to communicate with the public. The lawyers don't have a tool, or the I don't know, real estate, or what did you say? All the other doctors don't have the tool to communicate with the public. We have that.
But then we could be in the parliament. We could have seats.
Sure, but I don't know if we take, what's the, Stefano Boeri, it was the wrongest thing he could do to run for mayor. To actually try to become a professional politician was stupid. As an architect, as a practicing architect, he can have so much more influence. I think it would be foolish for us to do that.
I would like to bring Fabienne in it, because you're doing something
Sorry,
like this.
It doesn't mean that we are not political. No, no. You know kind of where I stand also, that I see architecture as a very, very political discipline, but let's not pretend, or let's not slip into the role of politicians or professional politicians. We're lost then.
No, the question is how can you generate political effects of architectural work, right? So how can you introduce the reverberation of this type of production into another space other than your own discipline? And I was wondering, Fabienne, you have made a decision which is quite interesting to basically operate in contexts that don't even have an architectural kind of scene and discourse as we know it maybe from Western Europe. You work as an urbanist, as an architect, as an activist of public space and infrastructure. How do you think can you make, as an architect, an impact in society? What are your decisions about that?
Like this. No, well, you just described it. This is just a choice I took, that I felt that I want to be in, I don't know, those regions or spaces that are extremely relevant to almost the survival of people. And I decided that what I want to do is to use architecture, let's say, as a mean to achieve something else. I'm not saying that's the only thing, but I'm saying this is a very important part of the work we do, you know, that architecture is a mean to achieve something else. For instance, the right of people to stay somewhere, for instance, to have simply just a better life, to have indeed the toilet, which I totally agree with. I don't know who said it, probably you. This could be the start of something extremely important. Better health, kids can go to school because they're not sick anymore, etc., etc. So yes, of course, I think as an architect, you should actually engage politically, and that's what I'm teaching my students. Yeah, but what I can say is that Vittorio Lampugnani, he gave his farewell lecture, I think it was on Thursday, and they even made it to ETH. So even Vittorio Lampugnani, and I think we have quite some differences in all kinds of, you know, perceptions of what urban design and cities and public space ever could be. But even Vittorio Lampugnani, he would say that architecture or architects are engaging highly political. So I think it's just maybe for once I would even agree with Manuel. I think we never agree, but maybe we would agree here. So I think there are different ways for architects to engage politically, but I would definitely opt for the more radical, more direct way of really engaging in real politics. Really, I think that's necessary.
That was very nice. Thank you. Thank you. It's very important, and I think when we see the discussion, we have somehow the topic between what is the architecture engaging something, or is it the rules, or is it the people who engage finally, who make public space? And I think this question, it's both, which is important. Maybe it's much more difficult to act in public space than what you said, really, right? With Novartis, it's possible to make fast something in this city. When you are in the political processes, it starts to be long and difficult and everything. And so, of course, I would like also that the architects get more political, since it stopped a little bit in the end of the 80s when there was a big crisis. Actually, it's not so much crisis for architects. You have really the possibility to do it. I want to open the round for finally also if there are some questions, yeah, to our architects. Quite a lot, or on the projects, or some statements from somebody. I have a statement here.
Yeah, I'm not officially on stage. I'm just translating, but luckily most of it was English, so I didn't need to translate a lot. So I'm Vivienne, I'm the assistant curator at Swiss Architecture Museum. And I think there's two things I'm fascinated by. And we're talking about new public spaces for Basel, and at the same time, if I look at the proposals, they all rely on existing public spaces. So we're not really talking about new public spaces, we're talking about activating public spaces. And of all of them, I found the projects interesting but slightly predictable, except for the project from Pecha and Schmidt. And I'm fascinated by that project. I'm intrigued, but I'm also really confused, because obviously there used to be Badeanstalten on that side of the river, which seems weird because it's the shady side of the river, so I'm not that surprised that they don't exist anymore. And you propose to put quite a monumental structure in front of the Münster that looks like it could be something historical, but at the same time it's a new intervention. So I was just kind of curious of, it seems to be such a different intervention. Also, you saying a public space, it doesn't need to be for everyone, it can be just for a selected few. And I guess I'm wondering, in what way is that space better with your intervention than what it is now?
In what sense it's better? I think the space as it is now is not, how should I put it? It's maybe not appropriate for the very special point in the city that it is, which I tried to explain in the presentation. So I felt it could be better. It's maybe, yeah, it's different from the others because it doesn't really, from the other interventions, because it doesn't try to achieve a place that it becomes very crowded, for example. But still, I could imagine that it becomes, it could have a more intense use in a way. Intense, not meaning the amount of people, not big crowds, but still a more intense use maybe. You addressed the monumentality of it. I mean, we did not really decide on the function of those two volumes, but we wanted to give the intervention a certain importance, which refers to the two towers of the Münster, but not thinking of a religious function at all, but just to give this space that has no commercial function a certain value, still being open what it could become. That's why we, in a way, actually tried to achieve a certain monumentality, still it being quite modest in a way.
Ich möchte vielleicht noch was ergänzen auf Deutsch. Was uns auch jetzt bei der ganzen Recherche interessiert hat, und interessanterweise sind wir auch auf fast alle Orte gekommen oder haben die mal unter die Lupe genommen, die jetzt auch hier hängen, ist, dass uns eigentlich die Frage interessiert hat, gibt es sozusagen den öffentlichen Raum
an dem nichts los ist und an dem man trotzdem Öffentlichkeit erlebt oder sich sozusagen in einem öffentlichen Raum situiert fühlt. Und das haben wir hatten auch die Drei-Rosen-Brücke untersucht und für unsere Wahrnehmung funktioniert die eigentlich ganz prima, weil das im Gegensatz zum Rheinufer ein Ort ist, an dem man zentral ist, alles was Emanuel gesagt hat, man erlebt die Sonne und so weiter, aber man ist ein bisschen für sich und das ist auch eine Qualität und trotzdem ist man im öffentlichen Raum. Natürlich kann man trotzdem so einen Ansatz auch verstehen oder, also ich will es jetzt gar nicht in Abrede stellen, für uns war das aber auch jetzt an diesem Ort eben das Interessante, der Versuch, diesem Ort eine viel größere Öffentlichkeit zu geben, auch eine Aufenthaltsqualität, weil momentan ist es eigentlich so ein Durchgangsort, man kommt mit der Fähre an, wundert sich, dass dort die leeren Colaflaschen rumliegen und es überall nach Pisse stinkt und ist froh, dann wieder oben am Münster zu sein, obwohl es eigentlich auch diesen Blick eben in beide Richtungen des Rheines bietet.
Gut, gibt es noch Voten oder Fragen, die gestellt werden? Dann gebe ich eigentlich die ganze Sache langsam zum Schluss dieser Veranstaltung. Ich denke, es wird noch Diskussionen geben, bestimmt, also hoffentlich auch. Und ich möchte trotzdem euch auch noch ein Kränzchen winden, dass ihr überhaupt das Thema öffentlichen Raum wieder aufgreift, was wirklich eigentlich bei den Architekten schon seit einiger Zeit so ein bisschen verloren gegangen ist, weil es ist, ich sage jetzt mal, eben anstrengend, wenig lukrativ daran zu arbeiten. Und es ist ja gerade, wenn wir von Städtebau reden oder Stadtentwicklung reden, ist es ja eminent wichtig, öffentlichen Raum irgendwie in irgendeiner Form herzustellen. Sei es als jemand irgendwie spontan irgendwo Bier verkauft oder mit Abfuhrplänen oder während der Abfuhr ein Fest macht an einem Ort. Das ist super, da kann man nämlich wenn Sperrgutabfuhr ist, kann man sehr gut im Prinzip da alles nehmen, man kann es gebrauchen und dann stellt man es einfach wieder hin. Und wer schon viele Projekte gemacht hat, weiß, wie praktisch das ist, weil Projekte zu machen im öffentlichen Raum, das heißt immer schleppen. Man schleppt. Also und man schleppt dahin, man bringt, man holt, weil es ja immer temporäre, ephemere Projekte sind und das ist eigentlich die Kultur des Wiederverschwindens. Und vielleicht ist gerade da die Kultur des Ephemeren, das haben wir heute nicht angesprochen, also die Kultur auch eben wieder des Nichtbesetzens, des Nichtverschwindens, des Wiederverschwindens, was ganz entscheidend ist. Und ich hoffe einfach, dass diese Diskussion weitergeführt wird, dass sie in dieser Art und Weise weitergeführt wird, also nicht Architektur versus Akteure und Regeln, sondern eigentlich ein Miteinander und ein sehr präzise Einpegeln dieser beiden Disziplinen, sage ich jetzt mal, die dann wirklich präzise auf den öffentlichen Raum agieren und den öffentlichen Raum damit auch ein Stück öffentlicher machen. Also soweit, wenn ich dieses Schlusswort haben durfte, oder wollen wir noch eins in Englisch geben? Weil mir fällt ein, du hast gebankt, dann gebe ich dir das Schlusswort. Okay, a final word in English. Okay, thank you.
I was quite triggered by a few points in the discussion, and you know, first of all, the kind of the question of urgency which I asked in the beginning, and I also realized where there is actually not really an urgency. There is really a kind of sense of luxury related to public space, the fact that we can discuss, you know, the shading and the seating, and not, you know, commercialization or the kind of expulsion of, you know, people from public space or you know, things like that, right? So I kind of understood, okay, it's kind of fantastic, right? And then there is Rhine, there is the Carnival, there is Art Basel, etc. I mean, I know Basel, and if I try to, I mean, I cannot prove it right now, but if you give me a little bit of time and a research semester, I'm pretty sure I can come up with a pretty good case that Basel has the best public space in the world, right? You know, and I think this is not a naive argument, because you just had the exchange about politics, right? And you asked, you know, how do we bring this to politicians? And Manuel said, well, you know, forget the politicians. It's about patrons. It's about people with real power, right? And Basel has this culture of patronage that should be taken seriously here, right? So the kind of exceptional, smart, beautiful projects that contribute to the city will be supported by the culture that exists in the city, right? And the finance that comes with it, right? And that contributes to this kind of fantastic repertoire of events, of exceptional architectures, of et cetera, no? So I think, instead of saying there is a problem with public space of Basel, that's where I footnote to my friend Manuel, I would say no, it's the best in the world.
Compared to...
Also, jetzt der Fairness halber, vielleicht möchtest du noch was sagen, Fabienne? Noch ein kleines Wort, ein kurzes. Okay, Andreas hat ja eigentlich das weitere letzte Wort immer noch. Also nein, aber du bekommst keines mehr jetzt, aber du wirst ja sehr viele Worte hier noch haben und sehr viel Präsenz und wir sind gespannt. Es wird sicher interessant, soweit, also allen Beteiligten hier. Vielen Dank und vielen Dank für die sehr schönen Arbeiten und jetzt auf ins Vergnügen und machen wir öffentlichen Raum konkret.